It's been the biggest challenge of Andy Burnham's premiership to date. His new government forced to review and delay early release legislation following an outcry from victims. Tonight, whistleblowers working on the ground in the probation service warn that with thousands of prisoners soon to be under their supervision, there's a disaster waiting to happen.
We're already in crisis.
It feels like a perfect storm.
While families who've already paid the highest price speak out.
It breaks your heart. That's what it does, breaks your heart.
This is a story that began 10 years ago for Gary and Leslie. Their son Michael, then a young father, was murdered in an unprovoked attack as he intervened to help a woman who'd been hit outside a pub. A few days ago, as they do every year, they celebrated what would have been his 37th birthday.
For his birthday. Love you, kid.
He was a great lad, our Michael. He'd help anybody. He'd do anything for anybody. It's horrendous. I can't explain it to you, because the hurt that you feel for losing your son, but then the hurt that you feel when you know it could have been prevented is horrendous.
Michael's killer, Timothy Deakin, was on licence for assault. A coroner later ruled probation failures led to a missed opportunity to recall him to prison before he murdered Michael. Gary and Leslie's anger is palpable. They're now campaigning for independent investigations when serious violent crimes are committed on licence.
Police, firemen, doctors, teachers, they're all accountable. The probation are not accountable.
They'll have my support all the way.
It's something they've even discussed with Andy Burnham, who supported them as recently as last year as Mayor of Greater Manchester. They're worried this new legislation, which will release thousands of prisoners earlier than planned from October, will put others in danger.
What are your concerns about thousands of people being released into the community?
Well, I think they'll let these prisoners out and they will commit the crime again and again and again and again. And thousands of families that are going to be in the same boat that we are.
Tonight, whistleblowers on the front line of the probation service right now have themselves sounded an alarm bell over the early release legislation, telling us their words voiced by actors.
It's a disaster waiting to happen.
The majority of the time, we get by on a wing and a prayer.
The public are at risk of serious harm.
There will be, without question, serious further offences committed. Individual probation officers will be scapegoated when someone is injured or killed.
When the worst happens, it'll be us that's dragged through the press. Not the head of probation, not the minister, us.
This is so dangerous.
We're failing victims, both current and future.
The parliamentary committee this year found staff shortages had been the main reason for poor performance, with a failure to update old data, meaning the prison and probation service had only recently realised it was operating with half the probation officers it needed. The results for many victims have been dire, and only internal reports chart the failings. They're rarely made public, but we've had sight of several. These reviews relate to some of the worst crimes of the past 5 years, including rape and murder. And our analysis shows common themes: a lack of professional curiosity, incomplete paperwork, weak enforcement when the rules are broken. But they also show junior and inexperienced staff members given complex cases with limited oversight, something compounded by the volume of work, and something that the early release scheme can only worsen. Sue McConnell retired from the probation service in 2024 after nearly 4 decades.
It's very understandable that someone would look at the sort of reports we've been discussing and feel that that person is entirely to blame. Those mistakes have been made. While the service is so badly overworked and in such short supply of experienced staff, I think those mistakes are inevitable.
Are you concerned that that system is going to be overwhelmed with the early release scheme and that the outcomes for victims will be really, really negative?
I'm sure there will be another horrible case where someone is desperately badly hurt or killed, and that in itself is absolutely heartbreaking. There will also be there'll also be high numbers of very, very anxious people coming out of prison who want to make a good job of it, but who will be deprived many of the opportunities that they should get, and that is a tragedy for them as well.
The jailing of serial sex offender and double murderer Simon Levy this month put the spotlight on the probation service once again. Following it closely, as she does every similar case, Farah Naz, whose niece Zara Alina was murdered and sexually assaulted by Jordan McSweeney less than a fortnight after his release on licence, with multiple probation failings contributing to him being left at large.
It's an important, vital service, but it's become the rubbish bin of all systems. So when will a government be brave enough to say, yes, this system is broken, and over the years, politicians, leaders, ministers have had a hand in this, and we will pay attention.
Something different, something effective is what all victims' families say they want. But offenders will be released from October into a system so many say is already beyond breaking point.
And in a statement, the Ministry of Justice told us that protecting the public was their top priority. It said that the government has invested £700 million in probation, including recruiting nearly 1,400 new probation officers and tagging a record number of offenders. Well, a little earlier I spoke to Nadine Marshall of Voice, which is a campaign group representing families of people killed by someone on probation, and Ian Lawrence, General Secretary of NAPO, the union representing probation staff. I asked Nadine to tell me what happened to her son.
Connor was my 18-year-old son who went away for one night, and sadly on that night he was attacked by a stranger, which left him with horrific injuries, and he consequently died 4 days later from those injuries.
Not just any stranger?
No. This stranger, we later learned, was a supervised known offender who shouldn't have actually been at the camp at the time. There were various conditions that he was supposed to adhere to, and he clearly wasn't, and hadn't been adhering to those for a number of weeks.
Ian Lawrence, you're the General Secretary of the union that represents probation officers. Do you accept that the probation service has failed to keep tabs on offenders in potentially hundreds of cases each year that lead to very, very serious offences?
The supervision of that particular individual, as Nadine well knows, was conducted under the auspices of a private company who had been introduced into the probation service. So standards of supervision fell to the floor, practitioners were unsupported, and that's not an excuse. What I'm saying is it's context.
Is this problem already, before we get on to the early release scheme and thousands more prisoners being let out, already sort of endemic in the probation service, this inability to protect the public from these really quite dangerous criminals?
Well, clearly serious further offences happen. The job of probation practitioners is to mitigate the likelihood of that occurring. But you've asked the question, the state of the probation service is dire. Our members already, even without the early release scheme, are seriously in difficulty managing their current caseloads. There aren't the staff, there aren't the number of trained staff in the right place very often, but a lot of inexperienced staff coming in. And because of the conditions that we've been discussing, many people are deciding to take early retirement from the service.
It is often an inexperienced probation officer. How important, how significant is that?
When you have a new trainee coming in, suddenly finding themselves swamped with higher level cases, then that's where mistakes will most certainly happen. But the blame for that are the successive governments, not just this one, but the one before, who privatised the system in the first place.
And every time there are one of these awful cases and awful murders by somebody who's on probation, there's supposed to be a review and lessons are supposed to be learned. Are they?
In many cases, the reviews do bring changes and improvements, but the constant theme is overwork and overload on the system. The more money you can spend in probation, the better the level of public protection.
How do you feel as somebody who's had to live with this, Nadine, to hear Ian set out challenges the probation service. You know, they know this themselves.
We're both singing from the same sheet, actually. You know, my concern is that those probation officers at ground level, they're not able to have the support and, you know, the equipment that they should be having. But also there's an element of managerial oversight that should be happening, that isn't happening. And what we saw in my case and very many of the other cases is that the probation officer is very often blamed at the bottom when there are structures in place and procedures with middle management and further up, right to the top of government here, that processes are not being reviewed, they're not being instigated properly, and the public is being put at risk.
Andy Burnham's new early release scheme relies on this very probation service that we've been talking about to keep the public safe, if it is going to work. What do you make about the safeguards the government says, and Andy Burnham says he's built into that?
Well, what safeguards? There's an awful lot of talk about it, but we need to see, you know, working practice, what those safeguards are.
Well, they say we're in a tougher community supervision than ever before, tooling up probation officers with new technology so they have more time to deal with complex cases.
Well, again, it's sort of hot water, really, to be perfectly honest, Kieran, because we've heard all these reassurances for the past 10 years, for this government, for previous governments. There is something fundamentally not happening that should be happening, whether it be lack of equipment, lack of experience, staff, managers not listening, you know, those above, you know, in HMPPS that can make those changes, legislatively, statutory, and it's not happening, and we're being put at risk, and that's not acceptable.
Ian, the government says it's going to be keeping offenders under closer surveillance than ever before, especially in relation to this early release scheme when thousands of offenders will be let out starting in October. How realistic is that?
So that's the plan. If we had the backup in the sense of terms and conditions to encourage people to come into the service and, more importantly, stay in the service, then we stand a better chance of enacting that delivery plan. The idea of emptying prisons of people who've been there too long, or people whose crime doesn't necessarily warrant a longer sentence is not new. And we just had a ballot of our members, and our members have spoken very loudly and very clearly that they can't take this anymore. And they've instructed me and my colleagues to look at the possibility of an industrial action ballot if things don't improve on workloads. So the stakes are extraordinarily high here. And I absolutely do not want to be engaged in industrial action. I'd rather have an agreement on workloads with this government, with this Prime Minister, that will better protect the public going forward.
Nadine Marshall, Ian Lawrence, thank you both very much for your time.
Thank you.
You're welcome.